With respect to how angry it makes me, it does make me angry, but it also makes me feel incredibly devastated.
Terrifying new data revealed by NTSB Chairman Jennifer Homendy. We're going to go over it and the prelim report on the Washington, D.C. Midair crash from January 29th, 2025 on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and we're going to go through the long-awaited prelim report on the horrible mid-air collision between the PSA regional jet and the military Black Hawk that killed 67 people. A couple of things first. I'm a little under the weather, so please bear with me in my voice. Also, this is the prelim report from the NTSB. There's a few things new, there's some things clarified, and there's a lot of information some of you might already know. But I'm going to go through the report. I've had friends and family ask me a lot of questions about this crash. So my news coverage will be going through this report and covering the points of interest or even significant things left out. There is new data that this report brings out, and I'll point that out as we go. And finally, just to stave off some inevitable comments, the NTSB themselves introduced Jennifer Homendy as chairman.
Briefing today will be NTSB Chairman Jennifer Homendy.
So we're going to go with that. In investigations on air crashes, the NTSB usually comes out with a preliminary report followed by the investigation docket, which contains all the interviews, the factual evidence, the maintenance, the training records, things like that, and really anything relevant to the case. Then finally, the NTSB issues a final report. The prelim is generated usually about 2 weeks after the event, and sometimes 4 weeks. This one is a little longer than that. It's the first mass casualty airline accident in over 15 years in the United States. The final report, I would guess, will be more than a year from now. And on this prelim report, Chairman Homendy made it a point that the prelim is only verified facts and evidence and zero analysis. That comes later with the final report. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm going to go through the report in the order it was written. On March 11th, 2025, the NTSB released this prelim report covering the crash on January 29th, 2025, in which a Sikorsky UH-60 Lima, under the call sign PAT-25, collided with a Bombardier CRJ-700 operated by PSA Airlines, a wholly owned subsidiary of American Airlines. 64 people on the regional jet perished and 3 on the Black Hawk. They confirmed that PAT-25 purpose was a pilot annual standardization evaluation with the use of night vision goggles. And then the report gives us the tracking of both flights. Then the report goes through the crew experience. On the PSA Flight 5342, both pilots were very experienced, and it's confirmed the captain was the pilot flying and the first officer was the pilot monitoring. On PAT-25, the instructor pilot held the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 2 and had 968 hours total flight experience, 300 of which was in the Black Hawk. The pilot held the rank of Captain, and she had 450 total hours, of which 326 were in the Black Hawk. What isn't included in this report, but I'm sure will be in the docket later, is the pilot's recency of experience. And then the NTSB prelim continues with the timeline for the flight, which I won't cover in detail here, but just point out some of the major points. PAT-25 filed a VFR flight plan with the instructor in the right seat and the pilot in the left seat. 45 minutes into the flight for PAT-25, the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, audio indicates the instructor pilot was the pilot flying, while the captain was monitoring and working radios at that time. PAT-25 initial contact with the Reagan Tower was at 8:32 p.m. The tower issued the altimeter setting as 29.89 inches of mercury, which the PAT-25 crew acknowledged by correctly reading it back. And following this initial contact, the PAT-25 crew conducted a change of control. The captain became the pilot flying, and the instructor became the pilot monitoring and working the radios for the remainder of the flight. The helicopter requested helicopter route 1 to route 4, which DCA Tower approved. At 8:39, ATC approach cleared Flight 5342 for the visual runway 1 approach. and at 8:43 p.m., 5342 made initial contact with the DCA tower. The tower asked if they could switch to runway 33. The crew agreed, and the tower controller cleared 5342 for landing runway 33. One thing I want to point out here. This runway switch is extremely common. Coming into busy airspace, there's a regional ATC facility that sequences flights in and out, and then they hand it off to tower, at which point the tower fine-tunes the plans based on departures and arriving flights. At 8:43 on the CVR for PAT 25, the captain indicated they were at 300 feet. The instructor indicated they were at 400 feet, but nothing else was picked up on the CVR. At 8:45, the instructor told the pilot they were at 300 feet and needed to descend. She replied that they would descend to 200 feet. At 8:46, the tower advised PAT 25 of the CRJ flight 5342 circling to land runway 33. A portion of the transmission might have dropped off the word circling, but regardless, the instructor replied that they had the traffic in sight and they requested to maintain visual separation. The controller approved the request, and at that moment they were 6.5 miles apart. The NTSB includes a map showing the distance at that point. As you can see with the blue track of 5342, it was pretty much heading straight towards PAT 25, which would have meant the lights moved very little in relation. 5342 continued their circle to land 33, and PAT 25 passed the southern tip of Haines Point. 20 seconds before impact, tower asked PAT 25 if the CRJ was in sight, and a conflict alert could be heard in the background of the ATC radio. At that moment, a traffic alert and collision avoidance TCAS was heard on the PSA CVR with traffic. At this moment, they were now just under a mile apart, as shown in this picture. Again, the CRJ is heading directly towards PAT 25, and from PAT 25's view, the lights of the CRJ would not be moving laterally. 17 seconds before impact, tower instructs PAT 25 to pass behind the CRJ. The pass behind thee may not have been picked up by the PAT 25 crew because a mic was keyed for about 0.8 seconds. But in response, PAT 25 again said traffic was in sight and they requested visual separation, which was given. On the Blackhawk CVR, the instructor pilot indicated that ATC wanted them to move left towards the east bank of the Potomac. 7 seconds before impact, the CRJ rolled out on final approach to runway 33 at a radio altitude of 344 feet and 143 knots in airspeed. Pretty standard for that kind of landing. 1 second before impact, flight 5342 began to increase pitch and the elevators were deflected near max nose up. So they saw something in that final second. Flight 5342's flight data recorder's last recorded radio altitudes 2 seconds before impact was 313 feet. PAT 25's radio altitude at the time of the collision was 278 feet and had been steady for the previous 5 seconds. The report goes on to mention that all lights on both aircraft were on and working. Chairman Homendy talked about ADSB, and for those who aren't familiar, ADSB is a box in an aircraft that can send a signal, radio signal, and can receive a signal. The signal carries information about the aircraft digitally. In certain airspaces, ADSB out is required, but not ADSB in. If you get ADSB in, you can see the others around you that are sending out ADSB. So here's what she had to say about that.
We still have a lot of work to do on ADSB. We know that the CRJ had ADSB out. It did not have ADSB in. We do have a lot of work to do with the Blackhawk, not just with this Blackhawk, but we are actually looking fleet-wide at the Blackhawk at ADSB. Number one, we have not been able to rule out that in this helicopter, we're looking at whether it was installed correctly, whether it was programmed correctly, whether there was some sort of malfunction, or whether it was turned off. But we're not just leaving that to this helicopter. We're looking at it more broadly to really understand how the Army deals with ADSB.
The tower at Reagan National, and at the time of the collision, was in a north flow, meaning aircraft were landing and departing runway 1 and runway 33. The tower was staffed with 5 people working 5 open positions. There were 9 total people in the facility. The helicopter and local control positions were combined that day at 3:40 p.m. The tower was communicating with the airlines on frequency of 119.1, but PAT 25 was communicating on a separate helicopter frequency. So 5342 and PAT 25 could not hear each other. However, both aircraft would have heard everything the tower was saying to each other. The NTSB report goes on to talk about the helicopter routes. The most important point is the 200-foot maximum altitude traveling down near DCA. The other point of interest in the prelim report here is that the NTSB mentions no lateral boundary for the helicopter routes, which we'll get to in a moment. Most other linear path boundaries are depicted in the chart specifications or in warning boxes on the map. The report then goes into the factual evidence of the aircraft. Most significant is the finding that the CRJ had damage to the lower right side aft fuselage where the wing meets the body, which included a section of one of the tail rotor blades embedded. Also of interest is the discovery of the barometric altimeters on the helicopter. The left barometric altimeter Colesman window was set to between 29.88 and 29.89 inches of mercury. The right seat pilot's was set to 29.87. And as I mentioned earlier, the initial pressure given by the tower and repeated back by PAT 25 was 29.89. The difference here is extremely nominal, about 10 feet. The baro setting is new information for us, but it puts to rest that was a smoking gun, because it really isn't. However, the NTSB is still unclear whether there was an instrumentation issue, and here's what Chairman Homendy had to say.
There is inconsistency in the data which led us to declare the pressure altitude parameter on the Black Hawk as invalid. We're now in the process of determining whether that may have affected other helicopter systems that used pressure altitude as a data source, such as the altimeters.
Here's where there's some other new information. The NTSB Prelim includes a review of near midair events at DCA leading up to this tragedy. For those who don't know, there's an anonymous airline safety reporting system called ASAP, the Aviation Safety Action Program. The idea of the program is to encourage pilots and employees to voluntarily report safety issues with enforcement-related incentives to encourage program participation. Basically, a way for the FAA to get data on potential problems before they become real problems. The NTSB has already dug into this for some data, and what they found is simply terrifying. And it begs the question of why this wasn't done already. 67 lives lost could have been avoided.
Information gathered from voluntary safety reporting programs and the FAA regarding encounters between helicopters and commercial aircraft near DCA show that from 2011 through 2024, a vast majority of reported events occurred on approach to landing. Initial analysis found that at least one Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, or TCAS, resolution advisory was triggered per month from 2011 through 2024 at DCA due to proximity to a helicopter.
This is horrible. Homendy said that at least one RA, resolution advisory, was triggered per month due to proximity with a helicopter. She goes on to say in over half of these instances, the helicopter may have been above the route altitude restriction. 2/3 of the events occurred at night. A further review of commercial operations between 2021 and 2024, there were 15,214 occurrences between commercial airplanes and helicopters in which there was a total vertical separation of less than 400 feet. There were 85 recorded events with vertical separation of less than 200 feet. That's 85 near collisions over a 3-year period. And this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest holes in the Swiss cheese of this tragedy.
With respect to how angry it makes me, it does make me angry, but it also makes me feel incredibly devastated for families that are grieving because they lost loved ones. It shouldn't take a tragedy like this to occur. Unfortunately, one did, and so we are calling on action, but there clearly were indicators where safety trending could have occurred. Fortunately, we have a secretary in place that is taking safety very seriously, but it shouldn't take a tragedy to require immediate action.
Everywhere else, the FAA requires vertical separation of at least 1,000 feet, but here it's more than half that. And I don't know who approved these operating minimum vertical separation, but that's just crazy. In Homendy's press briefing, but not in the prelim report, she shows a telling graph.
On the chart to my right is a cross-section of the airspace that extends from runway 33's center line, spanning from the runway to the east bank of the Potomac River. The figure shows the separation distance that would exist according to FAA charts, with a helicopter on Route 4 and an airplane descending on the glide slope to runway 33. As stated in my last press conference and confirmed by the FAA, helicopter routes established by the FAA have no lateral boundaries, and the Baltimore-Washington helicopter route chart includes no warning for helicopters to operate a defined distance from the shoreline. So this shaded region right here represents an approximation of the area in which helicopters could be flown. We know that the helicopter on the accident date was not in this area. It was to the west.
And that's why the NTSB is mentioning the no lateral boundaries of the helicopter route. Just a little bit to this side, and that 75-foot clearance is even less. And this was okay by someone. This became normal. Not 1,000 feet of vertical separation, but less than 75 feet, and that was okay. With 85 near collisions during that 3-year period, 2021 to 2024, and nothing was done, which then begs the question, where else is this happening?
The data we have pulled is from a voluntary safety reporting system that FAA could have used any time. That data from October 2021 through December 2024, they could have used that information at any time to determine that we have a trend here and a problem here and looked at that route. That didn't occur. Which is why we're taking action today. But unfortunately, people lost lives and loved ones are grieving. And I am pleased that FAA has announced that they've already begun looking at other airports across the nation. I would encourage them to continue to do that work.
In data from 2018 to 2024, Runway 1 accounted for 57% of arrivals. Runway 19 accounted for 38%. That's the reciprocal for Runway 1. Runway 33 accounted for 4%, and Runway 15 accounted for less than 1% of arrivals. On January 31st, the FAA sent out a notice to airmen, a NOTAM, prohibiting helicopter traffic over the Potomac near DCA except for life-saving, law enforcement, or presidential movement. The NOTAM is currently in effect through March 31st, 2025. The prelim report mentions the NTSB has issued 2 urgent safety recommendations to the FAA concerning helicopter traffic routes near DCA, which Homendy talked about in her press briefing.
We're therefore recommending today that the FAA permanently prohibit operations on helicopter Route 4 between Haynes Point and the Wilson Bridge when runways 15 and 33 are being used for departures and arrivals at DCA.
For me, you hear talk about the Swiss cheese model, as I've been talking about, of accidents. And here's the holes certainly lined up. Some big holes, some small. But what I really take away is the deviance of normalcy. The FAA had created a safety buffer of vertical separation being 1,000 feet. But somewhere along the way at Reagan National, it became normal to have much less separation. In my own life, I need to step back and look at areas where I might have let standards, personal minimums, rules get broken. And after a time, that just becomes normal. And that's what I pull from this NTSB Prelim Report. Also, friends and family have wondered if air travel is safe. And Chairman Homendy addressed this in the briefing.
I just flew with my daughter out of DCA on a CRJ with PSA Airlines. Aviation is incredibly safe. DCA is where I always fly out of. I say often that your biggest risk is in your personal vehicle when you're going to and from the airport. Aviation is safe. However, there are safety issues in areas where we need to improve to make sure that we are at zero. And so that is the role of the NTSB in investigating. This is why we issue urgent safety recommendations.
Also, I want to mention that the NTSB has been very transparent with the data on this crash, and I appreciate Chairman Homendy and her team. The NTSB is the standard worldwide for investigation, and I have full confidence in them for finding the probable causes. By the way, as we've turned this channel more to aviation news focused, we do have our sister channel in the hangar for the more hardcore aviation viewers. You can check it out right here. Also, thanks to our sponsors like Clemens Insurance. They not only cover my aviation insurance, but they can cover just about anything. So check them out at clemensinsurance.net. And Flying Eyes Optics, the best eyeglasses and sunglasses for under headsets or helmets. And you can use our discount code, taking off all caps, one word for 10% off. Other sponsors in the links below. If you found this report useful, check out our other report right here. Thanks for watching and for bearing with me for being under the weather. And Charles, abrigado pelos camisas. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.